Why can't we solve the crisis of meaning without religion?
Okay, so I think a lot of people in the new atheist movement had very good intentions, and they thought that you could build a consensus morality off of scientific truth claims. The problem that we've seen is if you disconnect science from some sort of underlying morality which values telling the truth in and of itself, science becomes a sort of tool for pursuing ideological ends. This is what a large amount of our respective lifetime was eaten up with for COVID, of where trust the science became itself a religious mantra, which meant outsource all of your critical thinking capacities to whoever the managerial regime had appointed as an expert that given day. And then it comes out on various topics, let's take mask mandates, for example, that they just straight up lied. And they admit they lied. And they said, well, we said that masks did work, then they didn't work, but we only told you they didn't work because we wanted to stockpile PPE, and then we told you they did work when it was available again. So it means that they didn't value truth enough to apply it, scientific principles, in pursuit of human flourishing. Rather, it was in pursuit of ideological ends. And so you can't build some sort of binding consensus off the basis of scientific observations or rational thought experiments, especially because if you don't start with a truthful premise, yes, all of your logical premises that flow out from there might be coherent, but if the original truth claim is not correct, then it's a little bit like saying brick walls don't exist, so I can run around with my eyes closed. Eventually your nose is going to run smack bang into one and you're going to regret getting the original premise wrong. So all of that is to say you need a sort of binding ethic, preferably that got things right before the age of empirical testing, and perhaps even gave rise to the scientific tradition. And I would say that's Christianity, not just because thou shalt not bear false witness is one of the 10 commandments, but because it solves the question of why do you value human life in and of itself. If you want a good primer to this, anyone who's watching, Tom Holland's book Dominion is a comprehensive overview of the history of the development of, he says, the Western mind, but it's Christian thought. He goes as far as to say wokeness is itself spawned from Christianity. I think it's an aberration rather than a kind of red-headed stepchild. And I think his chapter on the 1960s is the thinnest possible reading of that period. However, I do think he makes a compelling argument in that if left to its own devices without the influence of Christianity, the Roman Empire would still have been executing babies by burying them under the foundations of brothels and subjugating women to the power and appetites of the most predatory and violent man. It was only Christianity that stated the revolutionary concept that children themselves will inherit the kingdom of heaven, and that the weak and feebled have as much capacity for moral dignity as the strongest man, and that in the eyes of Christ, God, kingdom of heaven, men and women are indivisible. It's not that they're identical, it's that they're capable of equal moral consideration. No other, to my knowledge, religion or moral system has cracked that nut, and Christianity did so thousands of years ago. And I'm very much the C.S. Lewis argument on this, in that if it works in all times and all places, then it seems to be the most likely belief system that is representative of a common human moral experience. So if you're looking for that objective morality, this seems to be our best bet.
There's a lot to unpack there, as there would be with a question regarding the crisis of meaning. But I guess the start point would be, why does truth matter for meaning? I mean, seriously, especially if you have an atheist worldview, why does truth matter? We're optimized for survival, not truth. And you say that you'd run into a brick wall if you pretend it doesn't exist. I think that's quite a trite example compared to something maybe a bit deeper and something to do with the human condition. I mean, maybe it is important to optimize for survival and believe certain delusions rather than necessarily honing in on the truth. And you may run into some brick walls, but overall, if you optimize for delusions that work, like Christianity may well be, then actually that leads to better outcomes and you feel more fulfilled.
Okay, I will push back on the idea that the brick wall analogy is trite, considering we just spent the last 5 to 10 years debating whether or not we can tell what a man and a woman is. So I think civilization has gone so fundamentally astray from its foundational axioms that we really are reassessing whether or not we're looking at the same thing and whether or not the limits of reality are confines that we can accept. I mean, Mao famously went to war against nature and it ended in famine. Same thing happening here with the gender stuff. As far as whether or not we should value truth claims and instead just abide by comforting and useful delusions, I would then answer with a proposition that will make atheists or positive nihilists a little uncomfortable, which is, okay, that's fine. How are you going to have human rights? Because they're very keen on binding treaties and international laws, the rule of law. And if you hollow out the underlying ethic, which inarguably was Christianity, because it spawned the term human rights, and you make morality a set of guidelines which those who don't believe it, especially if they have power, work to circumvent for their own ends, then your human rights doctrines are obsolete. They are, as I think I said last time, a wish list of like, I just add the prefix I hope to the front of any of them, and that's as far as you're going to get. If you do want to abandon Christianity as a sort of polite fiction, then more honestly, you end up in the sort of resurgent Nietzschean Darwinian framework that we're seeing from some of the neo-pagans, neoclassicists on the right that say wokeness is a form of victim worship. It's weak, it's pathetic. So we should have, in a post-Christian society, no moral regard for them. We should go back to treating them as the Greeks and the Romans did and discard the blue-haired gender freaks like a baby on a Spartan hillside. And again, that's a coherent philosophy. I would say it's a rather harsh and in some respects inhumane philosophy. It's the more intellectually honest one. However, I don't see how atheists can reconcile that train of logic which leads there and also cling on to their desires to be anti-racist, anti-misogynistic, protect human rights.
It's a double standard for sure. And I think it's a big problem with trying to be a humanist, for example, without being a Christian. You want to have all these human rights because sort of human flourishing is self-evident, but it's a circular argument.
It's not. It's certainly not self-evident to, I don't know, Ted Bundy. And
human evolution where it's survival of the fittest.
Oh, it's incredibly tribal. Yeah.
And it relies on the strongest person destroying all others effectively.
Yes. This is why when Rory Stewart had that argument with J.D. Vance, he was appealing to Christian principles, and J.D. Vance was saying, no, ordo amoris means the hierarchical arrangement of your loves to ensure that you service those to who you should have loyalty, like your family and your friends, your congregation, your community, your nation. Then the broader world after that makes the most sense. I mean, the commandment to love thy neighbor as thyself, you have to know who your neighbor is and what is best for them in order to administer that love. You can't just have a sort of general, all-encompassing good feeling to the rest of the world. This is what the famous, I know it's been turned into a meme now, but the heat maps of moral consideration that Jonathan Haidt looked at. It's kind of absurd if the locus of your moral consideration is more with rocks, trees, inanimate objects, and the universe in general than it is your own family. I would suggest, much like Aristotle once said, if your moral system ends up in the place that murder is good, you might have gotten something wrong in your fundamental premises. I would suggest that if your moral consideration is as wide as inanimate objects and people you could possibly never hope to know and therefore not know what is good for them, something has gone astray in your moral calculations.
Let's close this loop on truth being a necessity for meaning. I think with the trans thing, it's a great point. They are running at a brick wall by ignoring fundamental biology, right? But isn't that also what Christianity does when they say someone walked on water?
Yes. I mean, that's making a claim that tests the boundaries of credulity. And that's the faith element. I mean, okay, so this is the thing I've always struggled with, because I'm very much of the same mental build, not in terms of intelligence, but in terms of character, as Jordan Peterson is. I can tell why Jordan Peterson says he won't be a Christian, because he isn't 100% certain. That's where the faith part comes in and finishes that, the ability to say with conviction that you are. But I think that he in full intellectual honesty, doesn't want to say that he is a Christian. I know he sort of has, but he doesn't want to say it with conviction until he is absolutely certain. I think, again, C.S. Lewis makes a good argument on this in where he says, okay, if you look at the Christian ethic, if played out in all times and all places, it leads to peace, prosperity, and human flourishing without needing to homogenize and liquidate cultural particularities, different family structures. Like it's not rebuilding the Tower of Babel when you take the Gospel of Matthew's final line seriously and say, go forth and be a minister to all nations. In order to minister to nations, you have to respect the differences of nations and understand how to speak to people in their cultural settings. So if it works in all times and all places, there's three possibilities here. Either the claims made in the Bible by Christ and all the associated stories were made by a madman who just happens to have got it right. Either he is the world's greatest liar, an absolute charlatan, and an incredible con man who managed to have pulled the wool over everyone's eyes for centuries, or there is something to the claims and the stories. Again, we cannot empirically verify how true those stories are, whether Sodom and Gomorrah was leveled to ash, whether Jonah survived inside the belly of a whale, whether Christ can walk on water. But if the ethic there is true for all peoples everywhere, then there must be something to it that our search for certainty, well, it might not be satisfied by adhering to it, but there is a truth to it.
Well, what you're alluding to is the whole liar, lunatic, or Lord thing.
Yes.
And I never really understood this because surely there's also the option that he just didn't say any of those things and that what was written down is not congruent with what actually went down at the time. And there are loads of issues with that as well. Would apostles be put to death for a lie? So that there are problems with that argument too. But I never really understood this false trichotomy, I guess you could call it, of liar, lunatic, or Lord.
I think Andrew Clavin puts it well when he says that the Gospels can be read as works of journalism, which is why they're flawed, but why they have significant overlap. And then each of the authors wrote in different languages, in different styles, to different peoples, because, yes, it was an evangelization strategy, but if they have correspondence in the events of their accounts, then that acts like a kind of nomological network, which proves the account to be true to an extent. Now, there's some wild stuff in the Bible. Anyone who's read Revelation, it's a hell of a trip. And I can't say whether or not the exiled Apostle John really saw all that stuff and whether or not that's going to come to pass. I mean, locusts with human faces, I might have to withhold belief on maybe that one. At the same time, again, if the ethics all line up, I'm not willing to dismiss it out of hand as a pure nonsense or even just a polite fiction. And I think as well, the reason that so many guys our age are coming back to Christianity, I mean, in France, they just had the largest cohort of catechumens baptized into the Catholic Church at Easter. 42% of them were 18 to 24. In the UK, young men's church attendance has gone up from 3% in 2018 to 18% total.
Do you believe that statistic? Because I completely don't. Like, I really can't understand why people buy into this statistic. It was done as a survey with 13,000 people by a church, some sort of Christian organization. And it's like a 1/5 of men in the UK spending at least one session in church every month. Like, I'm fascinated by the Christian argument, and I would describe myself as an agnostic. I don't go to church that often. And most people I know, again, this is anecdotal, but most people I know would never go to church. And it's like, I don't think there are 1 in 5 men that aren't Muslim in the UK at this point, let alone going to church. Obviously, that's an exaggeration.
No, but inverted. I saw this trend for quite a while, especially in political circles, because there are networks of traditional Latin Mass going Catholics that are cropping up in DC and now in London. And it is notable that by factor of 2 to 1, Catholics are outnumbering Anglicans. So I think what's happening is in small pockets that revival is happening and it's concentrated, while lots of denominations and local churches are withering and dying, mainly because of Fulton Sheen once said they've wedded themselves to the spirit of the age, and as the age moves on, they've become widowed in the next. So we can quibble about the statistics, that's fine. I do think that there is a sincere reversion to Christianity among our age bracket.
Agreed.
That's driven by the likes of, initially, Jordan Peterson, but I also think it's driven by the fact that there's a vacuum of meaning and there's a very strong imperially minded subculture rising up in their midst, which is Islam. Islam is very self-conscious about its political goals, its civilizational goals, it's uncompromising. So I think there's a lot of young men who can sense that this order can't last and that their civilization is under threat, going, okay, what was the moral substrate that inspired people to build the great cathedrals, that inspired people to have children despite economic hardship? What was it? Okay, let me give this a try. We'll see how long this lasts, but I do think that is one of the motivating factors to return to the pews.